For 18 years, I lived in a world defined only by logic, numbers, and tangible proof. I was a young professor of mathematics at the University of San Francisco, an atheist who had firmly closed the door on God. To me, religion was a crutch for the weak, a fairy tale for those who couldn't handle the cold, hard reality of existence. My life was successful by all standard measures. I had the intellect, the career, and the respect of my peers. Yet, beneath the equations and the accolades, there was a hollow silence I could never quite calculate. It started innocently enough. I befriended a Muslim family on campus. They were kind, incredibly patient, and entirely different from the stereotypes I had seen in the media. We debated for hours. I attacked their faith with the sharpest tools of logic I possessed, expecting their beliefs to crumble. Instead, they listened, they smiled, and eventually they handed me a book. "Just read it," they said. It was the Quran. I took it home, fully intending to skim through it, find the contradictions, and dismiss it as I had done with every other scripture. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by walls of books on calculus and philosophy, and opened the first page. I expected archaic folklore. What I found instead was a mirror. As I read, I felt a strange, unsettling sensation. It was as if the author of this book knew me. Every time I formulated an objection in my mind, every time I thought, "Wait, this doesn't make sense," a few verses later, the text would address that exact thought. It was terrifying. I was a mathematician. I was used to solving problems, not being solved. The Quran wasn't just a book I was reading. It felt like the book was reading me. Night after night, I wrestled with the text. I looked for scientific errors, for historical blunders, for anything to validate my atheism. But the more I fought, the more the walls of my skepticism began to crack. The Quran spoke of the creation of the universe, the development of the embryo, the movement of celestial bodies, concepts that resonated with my scientific understanding, yet were written centuries before modern science existed. But it wasn't just the science. It was the psychological depth. It challenged my arrogance. It asked, "Did you create yourself, or are you the creator?" I reached a breaking point. My intellect, which had always been my shield, had now become the very path leading me to surrender. I knew, logically, that this could not be the work of a man, but admitting that meant shattering the identity I had built for nearly 2 decades. I was Jeffrey Lang, the skeptic, the rationalist. Could I really be Jeffrey Lang, the believer? The turning point came not in a grand explosion, but in a quiet moment of absolute defeat. I realized that my resistance wasn't intellectual anymore. It was ego. I was afraid of losing control. I was afraid of submission. One afternoon, I decided to go to the mosque. It was a basement room, dimly lit, smelling of musk and old carpet. I felt entirely out of place. I stood at the back, watching men of all races standing in rows, moving in unison. There was no hierarchy here. The doctor stood next to the janitor, the student next to the professor. When the call to prayer began, the sound pierced through me. It wasn't just a chant. It was a declaration of the very truth I had been running from. The imam began the prayer. I mimicked their movements, feeling awkward, feeling like an imposter. Then came the moment of prostration, the sujood. For a Western academic, the idea of putting your face on the ground, the highest part of your body onto the lowest surface, is humiliating. It goes against every instinct of pride we are taught. But as I lowered myself, as my forehead touched the carpet, something broke inside me. The silence in that position was deafening. The intellectual noise, the arguments, the equations, they all vanished. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking. I was feeling. A wave of overwhelming mercy washed over me. It was as if a dam had burst. I found myself crying uncontrollably. Not tears of sadness, but tears of a man who had been holding his breath for 18 years and finally exhaled. In that lowest position, I felt higher than I ever had standing at a podium. I realized that this submission wasn't humiliation. It was liberation. I was no longer a slave to my ego or to society's expectations or to the chaotic randomness of a godless universe. I was a servant of the one who created order from chaos. I left the mosque that day, walking out into the sunlight of San Francisco, but the world looked different. The trees, the wind, the people, everything seemed to vibrate with a purpose I had been blind to. I was still a mathematician. I still loved logic, but I had found the missing variable in the equation of my life. Years have passed since that day. I have faced challenges, doubts, and struggles, as we all do, but I never forgot the peace of that first prostration. I realized that faith is not the suspension of reason. It is the destination where reason eventually leads if you are brave enough to follow it to the end. I came to the Quran to find errors, to prove it wrong. Instead, it approved me to be in need. It showed me that while my mind could comprehend the complexities of mathematics, my soul was starving for the simplicity of truth. And the truth was simply this: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. My journey wasn't about losing myself. It was about finding the version of myself that was meant to exist all along. To anyone out there wrestling with questions, fighting with logic, feeling that hollow silence in a crowded room, I invite you to open the book, challenge it, fight it, but be prepared, because you might just find that the book fights back, and in its victory, you will find your ultimate peace.